El Nino is under stress. It's do or die time. I'm Mark Sponsler. Welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, July 9th.
Stormsurf, waves, weather, buoys, altimetry, snow, temperatures, El Nino, weather analysis, essential data for outdoor people, all the time, no hype.
If you like the video, give us a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Get automatic notifications when the videos are posted, typically on Sunday evenings. And if you'd like to contribute a little bit to the cause, use the special thanks button down below, the heart with the $sign on it. And with that, I'd like to thank the contributors from last week. Tim Caston, Elliot Harris, Sporman, a.k.a. Jason, thank you so much. And with that, let's get to work. We'll start by looking at significant wave heights for the South Pacific Ocean, and really not a whole lot's going on. The yellow, or the light orange here, is like 20-foot seas, so there's some pockets of 22-foot seas. That's not even high enough or strong enough to get any swell to push north and to survive the decay that it would come, making the long travel up to the northern hemisphere. So really nothing happening. Yeah, New Zealand there, Australia there, Ross Ice Shelf and Antarctic ice, and growing slower than is normal for this time of year. There's sort of a lot of chatter about that out in Twitter and various meteorological sites. The thought being moisture from the Tonga volcano, developing El Nino, and of course CO2 in the atmosphere all combining to push air temperatures much above normal. That in turn is delaying the onset of winter, or at least the creation of ice in the deep South Pacific. We'll do a quick look at current conditions starting up in California. This is more of the Santa Cruz area than Northern California, but it's a good representation. Point Sur buoy, number 157. We're looking at all the energy that's hitting the buoy, anywhere from up to 33.3 second period, real long period energy, which there is none. We see a little bump here in about the 13 second range. So that's sort of minimum threshold for ground swell. And then we see a bunch of clutter down here in the 5, 6, 7 second period. 5 seconds is just pure wind chop. So this is the only swell here at about 14 or 13 seconds. You take the area under the curve, run some fancy math on it. We get primary swell being 2 feet at 13.5 seconds. From the south, that would put surf at about thigh to maybe waist high, and that's probably generously what it is. And then the wind swell in there at 3 feet at 6 seconds, which is even less than that, knee high something. So then we go to Southern California. We're going to use the Point Loma South buoy, buoy 191 there off of San Diego. Same sort of profile. The southern hemi swell there peaking somewhere in around the 14 second period range. Background southern wind swell mixed in there. Primary swell 2 feet at 14.6 seconds from 183 degrees. That would make surf at about waist high, and it's actually bigger than that at top south magnifying breaks, and then the wind swell in there 2.6 at 6.4 seconds, and it's pretty much not even rideable. Then we go over to Hawaii, Barbers Point buoy, south shore of Oahu buoy number 238. Again, we see this little bump of energy, background energy in about the 13 second period range. Primary swell 1.5 feet at 14.3 seconds from 192 degrees. That would put swell at 2.2 feet. We'll call it thigh to waist high, something like that, and then some little background wind swell mixed in. So the general sense is everywhere, California, Hawaii, there's just really nothing happening in the Pacific. Last little bits of energy still dribbling in from a system that was in the Southeast Pacific. We'll go take a look at that right now. And where you find this data, okay, so because some people have asked, if you're looking for Hindcast data, that is what the wave model said, the 0 hour, that's the best possible, most accurate depiction of what's happening in the oceans, is the 0 hour Hindcast model. You go to the wave model section here, you click waves, that'll get you here. You scroll down and see here these white dots. That's for the Atlantic, North and South, Indian, Pacific full, and the Pacific North and South. Then further down, there's a couple of others here for the East North Pacific and the East Coast of the USA. So you can get to this data that now goes back 2 weeks. So here is the Southern Hemi Hindcast model. Every one of these you see, 00-hour Hindcast. This is from 12Z on June 25th, so 2 weeks ago. Small little gale developed here in the southeast Pacific with like 30-something foot seas. Another one developed right behind it. See a little plus sign there? Right there, that plus. 33.5 foot seas aimed well off the north. And again, this is the Ross Ice Shelf down here, New Zealand, Australia, California, up at about 120. Just follow the line. It goes right off the chart. And that swell hit during this week. And as of Sunday, it's all but gone. You notice the system continued even outside of the Southern California swell window on Wednesday into Thursday, the 29th of June, then faded out. Since then, there's been another little system try to get organized on Friday, the 30th of June, a week ago, or even more than a week ago, but all the energy was pushing due south. But then eventually, as we get somewhere along here, there we go. So we get into Tuesday, the 4th of July. There a little bit of seas started developing at 20, 22, 24, 25.8 feet to be exact, and pushed up along New Zealand, then built a little to about 26 feet right there, maybe almost 27 feet. Yeah, 27.0 feet. This is on Wednesday, the 5th of July. Swell from that system is, and you see it continued even into Thursday a little bit. Swell from that system is radiating to the north, expected into Hawaii in a little bit, and then eventually into the U.S. West Coast. But size, because the seas were so small and the fetch area, the coverage of those seas and the winds that generate them were relatively small, so don't get your hopes up too much for some major south swell. It isn't happening. And then since then, there's been nothing down south. Let's go look for the next week out. What is coming? All right, so we're looking at jet stream level winds here. These are winds up about 30,000 feet. Those winds help support the formation of gales when they form, help direct their track. We're looking for a trough, a push in the jet to the north. And let's get ourselves oriented here. There's New Zealand. Can't barely see it, but Australia there. Chile and Peru off here. Antarctica down here, Ross Ice Shelf somewhere about 65 south right there. So this is the northern branch of the jet stream. It doesn't really do anything to support storm formation. It's this southern branch down here, which you see, looking at the colors, very weak. You want to see like something in the reds at a minimum, 130, 140 knot winds. So you see the northern jet here, the southern branch, the influential jet, basic branch of the jet here, basically pushing over the Ross Ice Shelf. Little bit of a trough. This is what you want here, pushing the jet to the north. That helps create a clockwise flow aloft and down at the ocean surface. That's the hallmark of low pressure in the southern hemisphere. And of course, low pressure, if it's strong enough, generates winds. Winds, if they're strong enough, get purchase on the ocean surface and generate seas. Seas, as they start radiating away from the fetch area, eventually groom themselves out and turn into swell. Swell, when it hits your beach, turns into surf. But this trough doesn't look like it's doing anything to support gale formation, and it pretty much just pushes out of the picture as we get into Monday. Instead, we end up with this split flow with the influential southern branch pushing down almost into Antarctica. Between the split flow, you get high pressure. High pressure does nothing for generating meaningful longer period swell, and that's what it takes to make the long 5,000-6,000 mile journey north up into Hawaii and California. So no real hope here. In fact, the ridge to the south only prevents it. It only supports high pressure development. So we're into Wednesday, the 12th of July, same sort of pattern. We're into Thursday, no real hope. And then we get into the weekend now, just about when we get towards the end of the model. We're 150 hours out. Looks like a trough theoretically might start developing here in between New Zealand and Australia. That's the Tasman Sea. Wind's pretty weak. Let's see if it gets a little bit more. Well, that's a semi-certified trough by Sunday, the 16th of July. Now, the caveat with that is it's 160, almost 180 hours out, a week out. Do I believe the model's that far out? You should resoundingly know that the answer is no, but maybe there's some hope. At this stage of the game, we'll take any shred of hope we can get, because there really hasn't been, other than this coming New Zealand swell, there's been nothing behind it, and right now, a week here of pretty much nothing. So if a swell generates down here and it takes a week to get north and we're a week out on the models, this suggests at least 2 weeks of no surf other than that New Zealand swell that's coming. So beggars can't be choosy. We'll take whatever we can get. This looks like a shred of hope. Let's go take a look down at the surface models. Here we are, surface level pressure, surface level winds. There was a trough. We saw it here in the southeast Pacific. You can see the fetch associated with it, all aimed due south, doing nothing. We're looking for any fetch, preferably 40 knots or more, pushing off to the north. We see a gale here off of New Zealand, but all the fetch is aimed back at New Zealand. If you're there, you're scoring. If you're not, forget it. As we get into Monday, more of the same. This low starts falling south. A little bit of some sort of low pressure tries to develop in the southeast Pacific on Tuesday, 11th July, but barely gets to 35-knot winds, not doing anything there. And then it's just this mixed kind of unorganized pattern. And we're into Friday. We're into Saturday. We know there's a trough trying to build here. We're looking for any fetch, and 180 hours out, we're not really seeing it. So for now, the trough isn't strong enough to manifest any meaningful low pressure down at the ocean's surface, and likely no swell to be generated. But just to make double sure, we go take a look at the wave models. The significant wave height, this is the effect of those winds on the ocean surface over time. We're just looking for any seas, preferably about minimum 26 feet aimed off to the north, but preference is more like 35 feet or higher, just to get a decent 17, 18 second period swell to start out with. Now there's a little bit of fetch theoretically under New Zealand here on Wednesday, but by the time it gets properly into the exposed southwest Pacific, it's all but gone. So no hope there. We're into Friday and Saturday, the 15th of July, nothing. And we'll just go right out to 180 hours and nothing forecast. So Southern Hemi, sound asleep for the coming week. Next best hope, wind swell. We're looking for any potential to generate wind swell. So California here, Hawaii here, high pressure. This has been the situation all spring and summer. Strong high pressure generating lots of winds along the California coast, creating upwelling, creating that big pool of cooler than normal waters off the California coast. We're calling it the La Nina hangover because it's not looking at all like El Nino at all. All right, so as of Sunday, northwest winds along, there's San Francisco there, Point Conception there, Southern California tucked in here. Winds not too bad, 10 knots out of the northwest, maybe 15 knots off of Point Conception, and trades for the Hawaiian Islands at 15 to 20 knots, a little bit stronger than normal. Pretty much the same sort of deal as we get into Monday, trades backing off a little bit for Hawaii. So we get into Tuesday, a little bit of a gradient tries to get going over here at Cape Mendocino with 20-25 knot north winds, maybe getting a little traction to produce some wind swell. Trades for the Hawaiian Islands. Wednesday, the gradient fades out. So this is just very short period, sloppy, maybe waist-high wind swell at exposed spots in California. Trades continue for the Hawaiian Islands. So we get into Thursday, more of the same, just kind of this nondescript pattern. So we get into Friday, something tries to start building off of Cape Mendocino, not in terms of low pressure, but just a gradient and north winds. Some of the models are hinting at, and you're not seeing it here, but a pretty good heat starting to build as we get into Saturday in the Central Valley of California. I saw one model that suggested temperatures up to 117 in the Central Valley as we get into Saturday afternoon, the 15th of July. For our purposes, northwest winds at 20 and 25 knots off of Cape Mendocino, generating wind swell pushing down into we'll say Central California, Bay Area and south of there, and winds maybe not so bad along the coast. Trades really lighten up for the Hawaiian Islands, some sort of a tropical system theoretically, but nothing on the charts right now other than this, and I don't believe the GFS nearly a week out. Winds continue on Sunday, 25 knots off of Cape Mendocino, more wind swell generation, light trade regime for the Hawaiian Islands. As we get into Monday, more wind swell for California and a light trade regime for the Hawaiian Islands. So, wind swell, probably the only hope, and they're only limited to exposed east-facing shores in the Hawaiian Islands earlier in the work week, and then for Northern California, maybe next weekend. Snowmelt forecast for the Pacific Crest Trail where it intersects with Tioga Pass Road in Yosemite. Tioga Pass still closed. We saw a good video. It's on the Yosemite website. They're giving you some clues of what they're having to deal with up there. I mean, most of the road is probably snow-free, but there's a whole pile of snow, like 10, 15 feet of it thick still on the just past Olmsted Point, and it's sliding down and sloughing down into the road. Very unstable, so it might be a while till Tioga Pass gets open. And then even on top of that, there's road damage. There's a lot of other things going on. So go look at the official Yosemite site if you're interested in what's happening there. We're looking for temperatures in the Sierra for hiking and that purpose. The freeze level, we see red the whole way to the top of the chart. This is 14,000 feet, meaning no freezing temperatures from 14,000 feet or below. So that's good. That will continue to help the snow melt. The waterfalls probably going pretty nuts. This is the big push, and especially if temperatures go as high as their forecast as we get into next weekend, there will be considerable snow melt and considerable water flow in all the major runoffs and all the drainages up in the Sierra. Proceed with caution and don't do anything stupid. Stay away from the water. It isn't worth dying for. And so with that, we go check the surf forecast. We're going to just start in Santa Cruz. We're not even going up into Half Moon Bay. I mean, there is some wind swell in the mix there. You can see surf heights in the 2 to 3 foot range. Let's go, and you see the wind situation here. Generally pretty light, 10 knots in the afternoon sort of thing. Actual swell heights, well, we're looking at, 3 feet at 8 seconds. That's the wind swell. Then as we get to Friday, you can't even see it here because the wind swell dominates 3.5 feet at 8 seconds. I mean, that's still only waist-high surf sort of thing. But we'll go take a look down in Southern California. And here's projected surf heights. Again, pretty small, but as we get into Friday and Saturday, there's a little bump here. I mean, it's kind of hard to tease out. But you can see the period starting to jump up 16, 15 seconds on late Friday into Saturday, and that continues into Sunday. Small, 1.1 feet. It's going to be bigger than that. Probably 1.5 feet at 16 seconds or something. So this is the swell from New Zealand. I mean, it's a long ways away. It wasn't a big fetch area. It'd be best, like longboarding sort of surf in Southern California. Then we go to the South Shore. We're using the Maui, but Oahu, same pretty much deal. Maui's more protected from the wind swell, so the southern hemiswell teases out a little bit better. Surf heights in the 2.5 to 3 foot range on Wednesday, then slowly dribbling down from there. Swell heights, you can see here, this is the New Zealand swell. Last little lingering bits of southern hemi background energy, 1.5 feet at 14 seconds. As we get into Wednesday, period jumps up into the 15, 16 second type range with swell heights 2 feet at 15 seconds. So that's 3 foot surf. And then slowly dribbling down from there as we get into Thursday and Friday and then fading out. So Hawaii has not had hardly any southern hemi swell all season because it's all been confined to the far southeast Pacific, way beyond their swell window. So at least a little taste of something for the Hawaiian Islands while California pretty much goes to sleep. And with that, let's go take a look long term. What's going on with the Madden-Julian Oscillation and the El Nino Southern Oscillation, the two major oscillations that affect weather and especially surf weather in the Pacific over the long haul. We'll start by talking about the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation. It has two phases, the active phase and the inactive phase. The active phase is like a low-pressure system, the inactive phase a high-pressure system. They rotate opposite each other on the equator, moving from west to east around the planet. Active phase on one side of the planet, inactive phase on the other. When the active phase starts moving over into the Pacific from the Indian Ocean and over the maritime continent, that's when all the magic happens relative to the Pacific. If you ever notice in the winter and you're surfing, it seems like you get storm after storm after storm for like a 4 or 6 week window, and then all of a sudden it shuts down for 4 or 6 weeks. That's the active and the inactive phase of the MJO doing their magic. The active phase, being a low-pressure system, sucks warm, moist air from the ocean surface up high into the air. That adds energy to the jet stream. A more energetic jet stream helps create troughs, and troughs help create storms, and storms of course create surf. This happens not only in the northern hemisphere, but in the southern hemisphere and wherever around the planet you might be. The inactive phase does the exact opposite thing. It's a high pressure system. It creates sinking air and just basically steals energy from the jet stream. If you have successive active phases of the MJO back to back, an active phase can create a Kelvin wave, a ball of warm water. As the active phase moves into the West Pacific, it also dampens trade winds. Trade winds typically blow from east to west. The active phase will dampen those trade winds, and with that will allow warm water that's normally all pushed up in the far West Pacific by the trades. If the trades dampen, the warm water starts sloshing to the east. Now, it's a long ways from New Guinea the whole way into Ecuador, but that warm water will follow the thermocline, sort of fall to depth, travel the width of the Pacific. It takes about 3 months for that ball of warm water to eventually make it to the East Pacific, and it'll impact the Galapagos and Ecuador, eventually erupting to the surface, creating a warm water slick there. If you get successive active phases of the MJO, they can create successive Kelvin waves, which they have done, and that can create a big and persistent pile of warm water in the East Equatorial Pacific. And with that warm water creates evaporation, and that helps set off El Nino. It changes the circulation, not just over the Pacific, but over the whole globe, changing the jet stream. And of course, El Nino is great for generating storms and surf in winter months, and even in the summer months following El Nino in the southern hemisphere. And is also great for ushering in precipitation into California, sometimes creating stormy weather in the winter months in California and also in Hawaii. So we watch for the active phase of the MJO very closely because it gives us forewarning, a couple of weeks forewarning, that maybe we're going to get into a storm cycle, be it either in the southern hemi or the northern hemi, and create a bunch of surf. All right, that said, let's go look and see what's going on and if there's any signs of the active phase of the MJO. We're looking at data from the TAO buoy arrays, series of buoys strung across the equator used for monitoring El Nino. East Pacific here, West Pacific here. That's New Guinea right there. 0, that's the equator. Date line, international date line, 180 west. We're just looking at the arrows. We're looking at wind speeds. We're looking for some sign that the normal trades which blow out of the east are starting to relax. Well, they're blowing pretty hard over the East Pacific, blowing pretty hard over the Central Pacific, and blowing pretty hard over the West Pacific. We call this the Kelvin wave generation area. It's real simple. If you get west winds or west anomalies in the West Pacific, that's where you generate Kelvin waves. West winds in other places here are not going to generate a Kelvin wave. It really needs to happen in the West Pacific. A lot of that is due to the fact there's a lot of warm water piled up in the maritime continent. As the active phase pushes into and over the maritime continent and into the Pacific, it drags warm water with it. And it's just, this is the sweet spot right here. All right, but it's not the actual wind speeds that matter. It's the anomaly, difference from normal for this time of year. So we look into the East Pacific. Well, trades are a little bit stronger than normal, just looking at the arrow. In the Central Pacific, we got some westerly anomalies here, so maybe a hint of something going on. But then we look in the Kelvin wave generation area, the West Pacific, trades stronger than normal out of the east. Not a good sign. Clearly no sign of the active phase of the MJO. Not good for feeding El Nino. El Nino needs the active phase of the MJO and or westerly anomalies, and we're not seeing it at the moment. So what's the forecast? This is from the GFS model. What are we looking at here? This is they call it 850 millibar zonal wind anomalies. Those are wind speeds up at about 4,700 feet, but they call them zonal winds. So it's just the east-west component of the wind. Because you want the westerly anomalies to generate Kelvin waves, and the easterly anomalies basically do the exact opposite. They suppress Kelvin wave development. All right, the blues are easterly anomalies, roughly synonymous with the inactive phase of the MJO. The yellows and oranges, westerly anomalies, what we want, associated with the active phase of the MJO. But this is the whole planet on one chart. So the international dateline, 180, runs right there. Kelvin wave generation area, West Pacific, starts about 125 east, so right here, to about 170 west. So this is the sweet spot right here for generating Kelvin waves, and that's really what we're interested in. This is also the sweet spot, too, for westerly anomalies to feed energy up into the atmosphere and feed the jet stream. All right, so this is past performance here, June, early part of July, and here's the forecast for the next 2 weeks. So we see right now, well, a big batch of easterly anomalies. That would be strong easterly anomalies on the dateline today and have been for maybe about 5 days. Looks like they're going to hold for another day or two, and then some sort of easterly anomaly thing continuing into about the 13th of July. We talked about this last week, too. We knew it would be about a week and a half of this easterly anomaly thing. Actually, things are looking not nearly as bad as what it looked like last week. The easterly anomalies, yeah, they're strong, but over a small area and only lasting not very long, and supposed to be moderating in a day or two. Westerly anomalies, already they're weak, but they're poised right on the hairy edge of entering the Kelvin wave generation area, and forecast to fill it, not super strongly, but fill it from about the 13th or 14th of July into the latter part of July, and then giving up ground. Now, this is the GFS view of the world, and we know that the GFS, more than about 4 or 5 days out, has some issues. I saw another model run earlier today. It showed a much larger and stronger westerly wind anomaly pattern developing during this period, and the CFS is showing that same sort of thing. So we'll get into that in just a second. But before we do that, we're going to look at another model. This goes out about 2 weeks to 15 days. This is outgoing long wave radiation, cloud cover. We said the active phase of the MJO is like a low pressure system. Well, low pressure systems typically generate clouds. So that would show up on this model. 5 days per panel. Look at these. Let's see. South America, Central America, Hawaii, New Guinea, Australia. Kelvin wave generate. So here's the maritime continent, all the little islands around Bali and all that area. So the Kelvin wave generation area starts about 125 east. So right here, there's the equator right there. So 5 degrees north and south of the equator from 125 east out to about 170 west. So a box like right in there. Right now, and the blues would be cloudier than normal conditions, more clouds that prevent sunlight from reflecting off the ocean's surface, outgoing long-wave radiation. The yellows, cloud-free skies, inactive phase of the MJO. Right now, yeah, very, very weak inactive phase of the MJO. 5 days from now, and this is per the statistic model, neutral. 10 days from now, neutral. 15 days from now, neutral. Okay, that's not bad. At least it's not a strong inactive phase of the MJO. Now, that's the statistic model. The dynamic model suggests pretty much the same thing, but with the active phase starting to build about 2 weeks out from now. This is interesting because remember, we saw the GFS model 2 weeks out. It showed, if anything, easterly anomalies kind of still in control and westerly anomalies fading. So the GFS sort of says, well, like the active phase of the MJO it's not even going to really appear, and it's just going to be a weak little westerly wind pattern in here and then fade out by here. Where this is also the GEFS ensemble model suggesting, well, maybe not so close. Quick, maybe the active phase is coming. Let's dig in a little deeper. Phase diagrams for the same two models, statistic model here, dynamic model here, the GFS. Now, how do you read these? Well, we said before, the MJO, both active and inactive phase, move from west to east, from the Indian Ocean to the maritime continent, over the West Pacific, over the East Pacific, under the United States, across the Atlantic, over Africa, back to the Indian Ocean. All right, where the heavy dot is, which is right there, is where the active phase is. So in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Now, if the dot is inside of this circle, the MJO is considered to be extremely weak. You see it traveling. There's actually 3 different paths here, but all of them have it ending up somewhere in the East Maritime Continent, far West Pacific, and exceedingly weak 2 weeks from now. The dynamic model suggests pretty much the same thing, just starting to enter into the West Pacific 2 weeks from now and quite weak. So no real hope there, at least for the next 2 weeks. the upper level model. So this runs about a week ahead of what happens down at the surface. This is up at Jetstream level. But it shows areas favorable for precipitation. The green's favorable for precip, yellows and oranges dry air. So one could say the dry air is the inactive phase of the MJO, the wet air, the active phase. Now this goes out 40 days, 5 days a panel, South America, Central America, New Guinea there, the equator right there, and you can see Africa over here, and the date line roughly here. So this suggests active phase of the MJO, at least in the upper atmosphere, starting to build in, continuing slowly filling the Kelvin wave generation area into the end of July, and then working its way off to the east, pushing into Ecuador in about the middle of August. With the inactive phase, dry air starting to build into the West Pacific, the very last day of July, roughly, and then August, making its trek across the Pacific. 4 weeks per phase, active phase, then inactive phase. You can see the clear pattern of both the active and the inactive phase traversing the planet in this chart. Kind of interesting. Now remember, I said the GFS said one thing, and it kind of wasn't a great forecast. The CFS paints a little bit and certainly more optimistic picture, right? Again, east-west component of the wind, the reds and the oranges, westerly anomalies, synonymous with the active phase of the MJO, the blues, easterly anomalies, the inactive phase of the MJO. And let's get ourselves oriented. Dateline right up the middle. We're interested in the far west Pacific, 125 west. That's where it starts. This is all past performance here. This is the forecast here. You can just, and the date and the Kelvin wave generation area ends about 170 west. So this box right in here. And what strikes is real obvious is reds, reds, and more reds, and pretty strong. So a giant difference from what the GFS model is saying. The CFS is saying, well, we have some westerly anomalies in the West Pacific. Oh, the dotted contour here. That's the inactive phase of the MJO with the blues, see, the easterly anomalies. So you can see it real clear. Inactive phase, easterly anomalies. Active phase, a strong one here, westerly anomalies, and a lot of them. Inactive, there was some sort of an active phase here. It didn't meet the criteria to get the black solid contour, but you can see the westerly anomalies there. And now here's our inactive phase, and now this looks like an active phase developing, no contour. So what happens is during the development of El Nino, what in essence is happening is the active phase of the MJO just sort of sets up permanently, but you lose the status. You can't see defined individual active phases of the MJO. It just turns into like this massive long-running active phase. Oh darn, that would be just horrible, right? Because it'd be steadily feeding energy to the jet stream, which steadily feeds swell development and precipitation in winter months, and all the good stuff that we want. Just like after coming out of a 3-year La Nina, it basically is like a long-running inactive phase of the MJO with easterly anomalies in the Pacific, shutting down storm production and precip and all that. And you say, but wait, there was all kinds of water this winter, and we were in La Nina, and it was all a long-running inactive phase of the MJO. But it doesn't all sync up exactly like that. Really what happened is starting in January, the active phase of the MJO started punching holes in La Nina. I mean, you can see these active phase, massive westerly wind bursts, and they started back even in December. We'll get into a little bit more. But that's what was making the giant storms pushing into California, all the water and precip. It wasn't La Nina. It was the leading edge of El Nino trying to get established. So you can have sort of this mixed bag of, well, it's La Nina, but it's starting to feel like El Nino and vice versa. We are in the transition right now. The big thing is, are we going to successfully land in an El Nino? I think the answer is probably yes. I'll just, I think we all know that. The question is how strong and of what magnitude. Strong El Nino, super El Nino, or moderate? We're going to try to explore that and try to sort of sort out the tea leaves in the next 20 or 30 minutes. All right, so for right now, looks like doesn't declare it an active phase, but you can see piles of westerly anomalies, and right down there, the little tip of the active phase starting to show up August 5th. So a far more optimistic picture. Westerly anomalies right in the Kelvin wave area, just right where we want them and right when we need them. And this is the CFS model going out 3 months. Same deal. Oranges and yellows, westerly anomalies, blues, easterly anomalies. Now, the roles are reversed. What has been happening in the past is down here. This is the forecast. And let's get ourselves oriented. Dateline right up the middle. Kelvin wave generation area starts at 125 east. So from here to about here, this is the forecast. And one just goes, well, look at this. It's a wall of westerly anomalies, strong, pulse after pulse after pulse for the next 3 months. Okay, this model was waffling the past month, roughly. I mean, it had projected something like this months ago. Then as we got into June, it really started, I don't know if it's going to happen. And just in the past week, it's starting to wake up. It was after even last week's video that all this started developing and showing up again. Yes, the CFS model overhypes things. Yes, we might get carried away and it won't be quite this strong. But this is, at least for the moment, is looking solid. And what's even better is this is today's run of the model, and we're only 4 or 5 days out from a potential westerly wind burst. This looks much more positive than what the GFS model is saying and what some other models are saying. So, let's overlay the MJO. All right, past performance, active phase back in March, another one later March, another one in late April into May. Dotted contour here, inactive phase of the MJO. That's seeping across the Pacific as we speak now. I think we're really past the worst of it at this point. But you see westerly anomalies forecast, each one of these tick marks is a week, so only, we'll say 4 days from now, westerly anomalies are forecast starting to build in the Kelvin wave generation area and getting pretty strong, continuing the whole way into the end of July, taking a little break. We start off August right back to the races as this big active phase of the MJO sets up from, we'll say, July 17th the whole way through maybe September 5th or 6th, something like that in the Kelvin wave generation area. The point being, in fact, let's go say the title of the video is El Nino is under stress. It's do or die time. This will be the savior for our El Nino if it happens. And by that, I don't mean we won't have an El Nino, but this is what would push us into a solid, I'll say legitimate. I'm not going to categorize it super or strong or whatever, but not a weak El Nino. If this plays out as forecast, even 70% of what it does, then we could be in a good shape as we get into the fall. Because typically during this time of the year, in the June, July timeframe, it's not unusual for the MJO machine, which is really what drives the development of El Nino, to sort of flake out and get weird and back off. And we're going to get into some data on that in a little bit. Anyway, as we get into September, yeah, active phase fades, but then the machine is primed. I mean, so these winds will generate a Kelvin wave if they materialize. At July, it takes 3 months minimum, maybe 4 months. So July to August, September, October, Kelvin wave. Another one in August to September, October, November, another Kelvin wave, and maybe another after that. This would create the, we'll call it 3 Kelvin waves really needed to push El Nino into something more than just an anemic El Nino, because the peak El Nino is typically in the November, December-ish time frame. This would be the magic fire. This is the machine, or this is the thing, the active MJO here in the westerly anomalies, to really help us drive El Nino over the finish line 3 to 4 months from now, all right? We're looking at this, we're looking at what might happen 4 days from now and going, if it happens, this will have positive effects as we get into October, November, and December, and that would give us a legit winter surf season. Fingers crossed. And then finally, the low-pass filter. This is the High pressure, low pressure bias, if you want to call it that. I can take, all this other stuff out. You see a dotted contour here. This is over, California's at 120, so it's centered over California now. High pressure bias. This is the La Nina signal. Not over the date line anymore, not over the Kelvin wave generation area, where it had been for 3 years, driving La Nina, all but withering to a nub as we get into the good part of fall. With the low pressure bias here, 1, 2, 3 contours, sitting firmly on the date line today, and expected to continue, if not growing in coverage as we get deeper into fall. This is exactly what one would want to see, and this is the classic El Nino signal. And then you overlay your MJO, your active MJO, your westerly anomalies, and you see it is really this low pressure bias that is driving the westerly anomalies and the production of El Nino as we get deeper into fall. All right. Given that, let's talk. We're done with MJO. It looks like, according to the models, we're in a pretty good setup for the fall. If you believe the models, 4 or 5 days will be the tell. But what's going on in the ocean, okay? Those winds have to generate Kelvin waves, and they have to be moving warm water around. So let's go look at the TAO buoy array again. East Pacific here, West Pacific here. And let's go see what's going on down in the ocean, because that's where Kelvin waves move. Not on the ocean surface. They go under the surface, west to east. So these little X's here, these are the anchor lines on the buoys strung the whole way across the Pacific on the equator, just from 2 south to 2 north. Okay, thin little band. And the individual X's are sensors tied to the anchor lines. They pick up temperature data, and then you use a model to fill in the gaps. You get a profile of what's happening. Warm water here, the 29-degree isotherm, actually it's growing off to the west or to the east again. It had backtracked last week. I think it was at 175. Now it's almost back to the date line. The 29-degree isotherm was back about 162 west. It's starting to move to 158 west, so it's on the move. 28-degree isotherm, not yet. It's at 125 west. The 26-degree isotherm pushing into Ecuador and reasonably deep. So we're looking for some sign of a Kelvin wave. Hard to tease out here, but if you look at the anomalies, difference from normal for this time of year, you see something, well, you see a massive ball of warm water. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 degrees centigrade. That's what, 11 or 12, 11 degrees, 10 to 11 degrees Fahrenheit off of the coast to Ecuador, undoubtedly slamming into the coast and erupting to the surface. But what you don't see, what is the concern when we said El Nino is under stress, what's going on back here? Well, we have one, maybe a little pocket of 2-degree anomalies, but no suggestion that there's any Kelvin wave in flight at all. We've been stalled for a month or two now. Active phases of the MJO, not as strong as we'd like, not taking warm water from the West Pacific, pushing it to the east. And we've kind of just got a hole here. We really need, and let's sort of, and we're all just eyeballing it, but from about here, this is about maybe 2 months, 2.5 months of warm water here. So July to August to September. As you get into September, right at the point when El Nino is supposed to be building, your warm water ball here is going to start tapping out, yes, at least at depth. It still has to migrate across the surface, but we would like an insurance policy, some additional warm water pushing east to help ensure this El Nino really has some oomph behind it. Let's go look at more data. So this is data using another technology, satellite technology. It's not really peering down. We'll get into that in a second too. Not looking at actual temperatures, but you can infer temperatures from it. All right, so no big surprise. The massive ball of, what is that? 4, 5, probably 6-degree anomalies off of Ecuador. And this goes to 80 west. Ecuador is right there. So you can see it slamming right into the coast, pushing up to the surface, advecting up to the surface, getting caught by the trades and dragged across this way. But back here, this is where that gap was. The previous chart showed 1. In fact, let's go look. Yeah, 1 degree, barely 2 degree. This is showing 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pockets of 2 to 3 degree anomalies the whole way across, and then more supposedly just off the maritime continent. So this paints a little bit better, more optimistic picture, and it suggests there's more warm water in flight than the previous data would suggest. So this is a satellite data that gives us an indication. You use a satellite to measure the height of the ocean surface, not the waves. Just take the waves out, take the wind waves out, take the tide out. And is the sphere of the ocean higher or lower than normal? And you go, well, why does that matter? Well, cold water at depth contracts, and when it does that, it'll create a divot on the ocean surface. Warm water at depth expands, it'll create a bulge on the ocean surface. So they collect all this data, and you look at it, and you can infer some things from it. So Chile's here, Peru's here, Central America there, equator there, dateline there, New Guinea right there, and this is the beginning of the maritime continent. Now you see 0 to in the scale, there it is, 0 to 5 degree anomalies all in here. Suggests there's mildly warm water at depth. Now, what there wasn't last week was a break right here, and that's a little bit concerning. This is the same chart that, where was it, down here? It's like, oh, things look pretty good. But this one, the source for it suggests, well, maybe not so much. But it also suggests 15 to 20 centimeter anomalies right here along Ecuador, which would suggest very warm water indeed. So there's a little bit of it looks like there's plenty of warm water. Not as much as we'd like. We'd like to see 5 and 10 centimeter anomalies here. But I'm beginning to wonder if the maritime continent hasn't. It's either one, we don't have some good west anomalies, or two, maybe the warm water pool over the maritime continent has gotten sort of tapped out. So let's dig deeper on that. Upper ocean heat anomalies going back a year. West Pacific here, East Pacific here. La Nina back last August, September, October. Colder than normal temperatures in the East Pacific. All warm water balled up hard in the far West Pacific, driven by stronger than normal trades on the equator, driven by La Nina. But then in December, little baby Kelvin waves snuck across, driven by the active phase of the MJO. La Nina's still in control, but we got a Kelvin wave. Another one in January. La Nina's still in control. A stronger one in February. So this all suggests the active phase of the MJO was strong, was doing things to the jet stream, the surface of the ocean, and the trade winds, and weren't affected, but it was enough to produce moisture into California, atmospheric rivers, or in the old school, the Pineapple Express. All right, now you see this big reservoir of warm water here being driven by successive, so we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Kelvin waves pushing across. Now we have a not strong active phase of the MJO pattern. We have weaker than normal westerly, or weaker than what would be expected westerly anomalies, and the warm water pool looks like it's tapped out. I honestly think there's piles of warm water sitting in the maritime continent. It just needs the active phase of the MJO to put it into motion to get it pushing into the West Pacific and create a Kelvin wave. So the key is this coming active phase of the MJO. It has to be strong, it has to hold on, and it has to do the Kelvin wave magic thing, or our existing El Nino, right about when it wants to get started, will start fading. Sea surface temperatures. Wow, this looks really good. I mean, okay, South America, got Chile, Peru, Ecuador, Central America, Hawaii out here, the equator's right here. Good, deep reds. This is the Kelvin wave, that giant pool of 6 or 7 degree anomalies slamming into the coast here, pushing up to the surface, getting caught by the trades, being dragged across the equator. All that warm water evaporating up into the atmosphere, feeding the jet stream, rearranging the Walker circulation, which in turn, it's going to take time, starts affecting the global weather pattern. That said, look off California. And we know, we just looked at the forecast, a lot of north winds still forecast. It's like 58 degrees in San Francisco right now, and even inland from there, it is not warm. It's like still winter up at least in Northern California, and it's clearly reflected here that trades are blowing stronger than normal along the California coast and even into Hawaii, suggesting La Nina is still in the atmosphere, even with a solid El Nino trying to get going here. All right, now, but I mean, this looks really good. It just has to keep going. Let's keep digging. Sea surface temperature trend for the past 7 days. Water temperatures, basically a couple little pockets of warming, another little one out here on the equator. And it's only on the equator, 5 degrees north and south of the equator. That's all that matters. All this stuff up here, that's not contributing to El Nino or La Nina, though this pattern here, and actually this pattern here, especially that, warm out here, that would suggest locked in high pressure, no wind there, the sun beating on the ocean surface, and out around the edges of the high, the strong winds creating the upwelling pattern. We've talked PDO before, and we're not going to get into it tonight because we got too much else to cover, but this still suggests a negative PDO in the atmosphere. So El Nino having to fight the PDO to justify its existence. This is a battle of the two forces, and which will win, we don't know yet. And then the backed off trend, you can still see clear El Nino signal, but still a clear negative PDO or hangover La Nina signal. El Nino has got to do something with that. It's got to get itself manifest in the atmosphere. This sort of suggests that El Nino is in the ocean with Kelvin waves and all that kind of stuff, and it's over here in the West Pacific with the MJO been doing its magic, but it isn't at a global level. It's not affecting the weather yet. This, to me, is the clear sign or proof of that. If it can't get established and do something in the Pacific Basin, the heck with the rest of the planet, that makes one a little concerned about the hurricane situation in the Atlantic because, well, you can see how much warmer than normal water temperatures are in what they call the main development region right over here off the Cape Verde Islands. It's the main corridor. Storms come right up like that. They got piles of fuel here, and if there is no El Nino, which creates stronger, the jet stream would rip across into California, across the southeastern states, and down out here, shearing the tops off of hurricanes, or at least redirecting them. And right now, we suspect that's probably not the case. So the southeast U.S. is exposed and vulnerable. Sea surface temperature trend in the Nino 1.2 region. This is the area right there by the Galapagos and Ecuador. Values, 2.856 degrees above normal, almost 3 degrees above normal, and has been there April, May, June, and pretty much well into July. No surprise looking at the charts, rock solid. But the official El Nino region, the Nino 3.4 region, this is the area on the equator, 5 degrees north and south of the equator, from south of California out to almost the dateline. Temperatures 0.886, 886 thousandths of a degree above normal. The El Nino threshold is a half a degree above normal. So we're just a little bit in the El Nino territory. This would be like weak El Nino, half a degree up to about 1 degree. Moderate El Nino is 1 degree to 1.5 degrees. Strong El Nino, 1.5 degrees to 2 degrees. And super El Nino, 2 degrees and above. So we have a long ways to go to get there. We are in weak El Nino status officially, trying to ease up, but what needs to happen is the atmosphere needs to become coupled with the ocean. The ocean says El Nino. The atmosphere, based on the cold water off of California, based on a couple of other things, is going, no, I don't see it. I don't believe it. The warm water has to last long enough to punch a hole in the prevailing La Nina pattern. So let's speak to that point. We're going to look at the Southern Oscillation Index. Difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, and Tahiti. Tahiti in the Pacific Ocean, pretty close to the equator. Darwin, more or less in the maritime continent, over towards the Indian Ocean. When pressure is lower in Tahiti, the index goes negative. Well, it's not negative, it's 4.31. And it's been positive for, I think I counted it, 15 or 17 days, okay? Prior to that, lots of negative. We talked about that stalling thing in the MJO. This wouldn't be doing this if the MJO wasn't stalled and if the, and if we had a stronger pattern going on. The 30-day average takes the noise out of it. You can see 30-day average was down at minus 16. It was even down lower than that a month ago. Today, plus 2.35. Atmospherically, literally, it's saying we're dead neutral. There is what El Nino? Don't know what you're talking about. The 90-day average, this is the El Nino La Nina indicator. Well, oops, sorry. Here, we'll do it this way. We're at minus 609. So it says, okay, we're a little bit below average, but nothing fantastic. And we got down to about minus 7.83, I think. And now we're starting to rise. So this all suggests that our El Nino, or at least the fundamentals of El Nino, the building blocks, the MJO machine is stalling. Here's the 30-day moving SOI graphed out. You can see it plain as day here. So anything above zero is at least the inactive phase of the MJO. If it's long running enough, it's La Nina. Anything below zero is the active phase of the MJO, or really El Nino. Now, actually, I should say the downward spikes are the active phase, the upward spikes are the inactive phase. When you have more inactive phases than active phase, your average goes up, just like we did here, and you have La Nina. So, in January, in January, you see it was just nonstop active phase of the MJO until about the beginning of June. Remember June 10th or something like that. And then since then, it's just been a steady upward disintegration of the MJO. The decay, the pause of the MJO El Nino producing machine. So let's dig into that just a little bit. All right, so let's take a look here. I'll move myself out of the way. Let's take a look at sea surface temperatures today, July 8th, 2023. You can see our sea surface temperature anomaly, much warming here. And actually, the core warming, this light orange here, it actually was back at about 130, 132 west. It looks like it's growing a little. And still, this is very solid indeed. We're going to historically compare this. I mean, you see the warm water making its way up to the tip of Baja and then gets cut off by this northwest flow here that's only going to be enhanced over the next week. And down into South America, and this is pretty much the classic El Nino triangle. Let's compare this to 1997. So that's the 97 El Nino. You see the density of the really warm temperatures stronger. The density of the warmest temperatures out here going out to almost 150, whereas they only go to 130. So a 97 was considered a super El Nino. It's the gold standard El Nino. So we're not on track to do that. Definitely not. But here is the 2015 Super El Nino, July 8th. So that's 2015. This is today. We're doing better than the 2015 one by a good margin. Much darker, much warmer temperatures close, more eastward based, much denser warming temperatures out here. So don't mistake my complaining about El Nino and it possibly stalling, or that the fact that it has stalled, that all hope is lost and we're going back to La Nina or even a neutral. Probably not. None of the models suggest that. In fact, all I was saying really is we're not on track for a 97 El Nino. That's probably okay, because that was almost too much wind, too much rain. This might be a little bit more, it's very eastward based. That'll focus rain. So north of where the warmest temperatures are as you get into December and January is where all the weather's going to be. So this, if the core of El Nino was out here, like a Modoki El Nino, then I wouldn't think you'd be dragging rain into California. But because of this, I'd say, at least right now, probability for rain for California this winter looks better, assuming this all comes together. So let's just blast through this real quick one more time. 97, you can see pretty strong for this time of year. 2015, still looks pretty strong. But this year, stronger than 2015, just not at 97 standards. All right, so we're going to do a little bit of a dive here. We're going to try to make this pretty quick. And first off, thanks to Ben for bringing this to my attention. He went and did some climatological analysis and started looking at past El Niños, peak sea surface temperature anomalies in the Nino 3.4 region. And he goes, hey, I started looking and I found that it's kind of not unusual for there to be a stall in the development of warm temperatures in the Nino 3.4 region during the months of July or somewhere in the middle of its development. So I said, cool, let me go look at it myself. And so I did some analysis. And what I defined a stall as is growth less than 1/10 of a degree between 2 consecutive months. Okay, so we're going to go back to 1957, the month January, February, the whole way through December and into January of 58. And I'm not even looking at this. We're just looking at the sea surface temperature anomaly. And here you go. You see temperatures starting to grow in February, March, April, May, June. July, they went to 1.34, and then they stalled. They didn't grow at all in August. They even backtracked in September. They barely grew, just barely a 1/10 of a degree in October. And then they took off and you almost hit super El Nino status 3 months later. So this sort of hints at, well, the stall thing maybe isn't unusual, but then maybe right after the stall, I mean, to get these sort of temperature increases, you had to have some major MJO Kelvin wave activity to get you there. Maybe that's what's going on. So let's go look at some other. These are strong and super El Ninos with anomalies greater than or equal to 1.5 degrees above normal. 65, no stall. I did the analysis for you. Just look for the arrows that are here to the side. 72, oh, look at this. Between May and June there was a stall. Then in July it came on like gangbusters. The 82 El Nino, which is the other gold standard just below what I would say the 97 was, look at this. In June and July temperatures actually dropped. We didn't get a 0.1 degree growth in June, and then we went backwards almost 0.15 a degree in July, only to then come on like gangbusters after that. 87. Same sort of stall, did it in April and May. And these are all strong El Ninos. And then the 91, a little bit in May. And certainly there, it went way backwards from 0.86 to 0.36 in September of 91. And then 97, of course, just gangbusters the whole time, steadily growing. And 2009, which was a strong El Nino, we even had that a little baby stall, 0.8 of a degree, and then we were off to the races, and that was in August. Now, oh, and 2015 is another one. There was a stall. It was in February and March. I wouldn't really call that a stall. And then this was, we ended up at 2.71 degrees above normal. So this one was pretty solid. All right, moderate El Ninos. In 63, we had a little stall in May. In 94, this one was only a 1.19 degree El Nino, but we had basically a dead zone in May, June, and July. Same deal in 2002. It stalled in July and August. So, theoretically, what is happening right now is not unprecedented. In fact, it's happened in a good portion of every storm we're looking at here, probably 65% or better, 70%. So, maybe panic is not warranted yet. Sea surface temperature forecast for the Nino 3.4 region from the CFS model. Again, this is the official El Nino monitoring region. Plain as day, there is the pause. This line here, this is mid-July, not the beginning of July. So this is July 15th. Pause holding at 0.95 degrees, which is about where we're at right now. And theoretically, boom, right into business as soon as we get into the later part of July and early August, with temperatures up to 1.75 degrees, maybe almost 1.8 degrees above normal. That would put us in strong El Nino status as we get into November and December. Strong El Nino, very respectable. Now, this is the unfiltered version, if you will. The PDF corrected version, I'm not buying any of this now. It says temperatures are already falling back to 0.75 degrees right, as of now. We're nowhere close to that. Here's the temperatures as of today, 0.886, and they've been basically holding at 0.8 or 0.81 for over a month now. And this model says temperatures dropping to 0.75 degrees and not even starting to take off again till, well, that'd be about August there, to mid to late August, and then pushing up to only 1.4, 1.45 degrees, so that'd just be a moderate El Nino. So when I say, yeah, there's going to be some sort of El Nino, I'd say either end of the spectrum here on the CFS model is saying, yeah, moderate to moderately strong El Nino, and a whole bunch of other models. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole looking at every model, but that data will come out probably in the next week or so. We can go down that and check it out. But for now, I'd say we're in pretty good shape. So let's rewind, get back to reality, get down to earth. Surf. Is there going to be surf for the next week? Not really. Little bit of southern hemiswell, mainly focused for Hawaii. Should be extremely inconsistent, hardly noticeable in California, but there will be some waves. Wind swell up for northern California, and that's about it. And no storms forecast in the southern hemisphere for at least the next week. So we are definitely in the dead zone. If El Nino is in the dead zone, surf-wise, we're really in the dead zone. As we've been saying in the water, worst winter ever, followed by the worst summer ever. No big surprise, though. That is classic La Nina, and we're deep in it now. We're waiting for El Nino to do its magic. So, back up to where are we on that? Well, we are kind of in a biting our nails, waiting, but I think in the next 4 or 5 days, we're going to be in a lot better position to know how this El Nino is going to pop out over the next coming months. If we get the westerly wind burst that is forecast, and the active phase of the MJO develops just 5 days out, maybe we'll be okay. And if the GFS model is a little bit wrong in undercalling the westerly wind anomalies for the Kelvin wave generation area later this week, which I think it probably is, but we'll see. It's already started to make some turns suggesting maybe it's going to build. And if that happens, and if the CFS model is even close to right, we're in good shape. But it is a forecast. It is not happening right now. The ground truth, the only thing that really matters is what's happening right now. Next week, I'd like to be able to say we have good westerly anomalies and things are looking, good in the Kelvin wave generation area, but we're not there yet. It is a promise. The check is in the mail. Do you believe the check is coming or do you not? I'm going to be pessimistic for right now and say I'll believe it when I see it, and hopefully I'll see it next week. All right, so that's the forecast for this week. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give us a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. I'd like to thank everybody that watched it last week, and we got a record number of views. And if you haven't subscribed, please do it. You'll get automatic notifications when we do these videos weekly. And you can go to stormsurf.com, follow along on all the models, see all the stuff there, and then test your knowledge against what we say here. And if you don't agree with something we say or something doesn't make sense, give us a comment. We'd be happy to reply. We try to reply to all comments. And it's a learning process for all of us. Just like I said, Ben was helping me, so I'm trying to help you. We're all learning together. All right? And if you want to donate a little bit, that'd be great too. Otherwise, we'll see you next week, same time, same channel. Thanks for watching.